Sushruta for NEET is now available on the Google Play Store. Try it out for free.
So good morning, students. So in our last class, we have studied this thing, the strength of H2O2 solutions, particularly H2O2. And why we call H2O2 solutions? Because it is very difficult to find out 100% H2O2 solution. Why? Because we know H2O2 is always formed with the presence of water or something. Even H2O2, whatever you make, it has some decomposition tendency. It is not thermally or thermodynamically a stable molecule. And why it is not thermodynamically stable? Because of the OH-OH bond. Because we know the structure, perhaps you will see little later. In H2O2, if you look at this is OH and OH, two OH groups, they bind together. There is oxygen-oxygen single bond. And because of this OO bond, this molecule is thermodynamically less stable. And why? Because of the OO bond, it is thermodynamically less stable because both the oxygens contain two lone pairs. And this lone pair of electrons, they repel each other. They don't like each other. They repel each other. We know electrons having same charge or same electron density, these two electron density of these two atoms will repel each other. And because of the repulsion, H2O2 usually it is thermodynamically not much stable. However, it is still kinetically stable. The difference, the thermodynamically stable or kinetically stable, it means thermodynamically stable means the free energy that you look at, the spontaneity, spontaneous delta G value. So whether the delta G value for this, if you look at the reaction for H2O2, it gives H2O plus oxygen. This is a spontaneous reaction. Delta G is a negative for this reaction. It means this reaction has a natural tendency to go, this compound has this reactant has a natural tendency to go into the forward direction. However, it is still available. One can find it. This is because it is kinetically stable. Kinetically stable, it means each reaction is associated with certain barrier, reaction barrier that we call. And what is the barrier in a more detail we'll see in chemical kinetics. So this kind of assembly, if the barrier is high, so that barrier is not easily surmountable. So these reactants, they do not easily get converted into the product. So this way this H2O2 is kinetically stable. So we find H2O2, we get H2O2, and this is how H2O2 is also available. And once, but with to leave the H2O2 for a longer duration, longer time, it will absorb certain heat from the atmosphere or from the surrounding, or maybe in the presence of sunlight, particularly UV rays, it absorbs and it gets converted into this product. So even 100, that is why getting 100% H2O2 is very difficult. Anyway, so that's not a problem because we don't need 100% H2O2. So what does it mean? If your H2O2 solution is provided, it has something is written on the bottle. And what that does that mean? So let us first understand, usually this is 30% H2O2 solution is marketed as 100 volume hydrogen peroxide. 100 volume is sometimes also written as 100 V. So 100 volume hydrogen peroxide means this solution, this is the 100 volume hydrogen peroxide means it is 30% H2O2 solution, and this 30% is the strength of the solution that you know we have studied the strength of the solution in the solution chapter. So again, now let us see, it means the 100 volume means 1 volume of H2O2 hydrogen peroxide will provide 100 volume oxygen gas. Remember, H2O2 hydrogen peroxide is a liquid, and when we are talking about oxygen gas, it's not a gaseous. Oxygen means we are talking about a gas. So it will provide 100 ml, 100 volume of gas. So if we take 1 ml of this 30% H2O2 solution, we will get 100 ml oxygen gas on complete decomposition. When all of the H2O2 will be decomposed into the water and oxygen. Or if we take suppose 1 liter, then we'll get 100 liter of oxygen gas if the strength of H2O2 solution is 30%. And this is the reaction, H2O2 gives water plus oxygen, and this is the balance. We have just balanced it by putting coefficients 2 before H2O2 and water. And this thing we have already seen. So commercially, but commercially marketed sample is 10 volume. It is not 100 volume. as we show here in the case of 30% H2O2 solution. It is a 10 volume, which means that sample contains only 3% H2O2, means the strength of the sample is 3%. And it means 100 volume was 30%, to 10 volume was 30 divided by 10, so it's a 3%. Now let us look into this question. Calculate the strength of 10 volume solution of hydrogen peroxide. 10 volume solution strength, as I said, that will be 3%. But how will we get that from this? So anyway, let us calculate. How can we calculate the strength of H2O2 solution if the volume, whatever the way it is marketed is given, a strength is given certain volume. So the 10 volume solution of H2O2 means 10 volume means 1 volume H2O2 will give 10 volume oxygen on complete decomposition. But it means if I take volume as a in a liter of H2O2 solution, which is a liquid in the liquid state, and then what does it mean? It will give 10 liter of oxygen at STP on complete decomposition. So this is the reaction. 2H2O gives 2H2O2 gives 2H2O plus oxygen gas, and we know this is 1 mole gas, and 1 mole gas occupy 22.7 liter at STP. Remember, the old books still provide 22.4. However, NCERT gives 22.7. And why it is 22.7? Because the pressure that we consider for the at STP, that pressure has now reduced. People have taken the bit slightly reduced pressure, and because with the pressure volume is reverse proportional because of the Boyle's law, so the volume has slightly increased. So this 22.7 liter at STP is the volume of 1 liter oxygen gas. And why this is for the pressure 22.4, some books also still provide. This is the value provided in NCERT, so you should, I think, follow this number. We obtain when 2 moles of H2O2 is decomposed. This means, and if you look at the 2 moles of H2O2, the mass in gram, it is 1 mole of H2O2 is 2 for 2 hydrogen, so 2 into 1 plus 2 into 16, so it will be 34. 2 moles of H2O2 means what is it? 2 into 34 means 68 gram per mole. So 2 moles, 1 mole is 34 gram, 2 moles is 68 gram of H2O2. And this gives 1 mole of oxygen. 1 mole of oxygen is 22.7 liter at STP. Now what is, we have this information that 22.7 liter of oxygen is produced from 68 gram H2O2 at STP. This is what this reaction is telling us. It means if I consider only 10 liter of oxygen at STP, then what, from how much gram of H2O2 it will produce? So it will be 68 divided by 22.7 whole into 10 liters. So this is what we get. So 22.7 liter oxygen is produced from 68 gram H2O2. So 1 liter of O2 will be produced from 68 divided by 27. And 10 liter will be 68 divided by 27 whole into 10. And this units we can provide here. So units we will write. So the liter volume, these 2 volumes will be in the liter. That is what we are considering here. The mass in the gram. So it will come out to be 29.96 gram, which is almost 30 gram H2O2. And 30 gram H2O2 means in what volume we have considered? 30 gram H2O2, 10 liter of O2. 10 liter of O2 means from where this is the 10 volume H2O2 solution. So it means a 10 liter of H2O2 has come from 1 liter of H2O2 solution. This is 1 liter. So it means 30 gram of H2O2 was there in how much liter of the solution? What volume of solution? It was 1 liter of the solution. So the strength of H2O2 will be in 10 volume H2O2 solution will be 30 gram per 1 liter, so 30 gram per liter, which is what we call 3% mass by volume. We also see there are some more complex numerical problems, but those numerical problems we will see later on in volumetric analysis perhaps. And I just wanted you to know what is the 10 volume or 3 volume or 100 volume or 60 volume H2O2 means, from which we can calculate the mass, and we know the mass. From the mass we can get number of equivalents, we can get number of moles, and from that we can solve many other problems. From the number of equivalents we can calculate normality, from the number of this gram is there, the number of moles is anyway that we can calculate. Now let us look into the structure of H2O2, hydrogen peroxide. And as I said, in hydrogen peroxide H2O2, there is oxygen-oxygen bond, and oxygen-oxygen bond, and there is also two OH bonds. So two OH bond is here. I have explained even the last time in the last class. Two OH bonds are there, and these two OH bonds are actually two OH groups are associated, attached with each other, linked with each other through OO single bond, which is a covalent bond. Now, if you look at the structure of H2O2 in the solid state, the crystalline state, and the gas phase, so we will see a quite difference in this structure. And what the major difference that we see, this H2O2 structure that we call is an open book structure kind of thing. So something, let me just correct this one. This is the gas phase, and this is the solid crystalline phase. These values. Okay, so this is a gas phase. What we see is the open book. The book is kind of open, and the way you see its structure, so the two OH groups will be on the pages, and the line of the pages when you open the book, and the joints of that book, the hinge is that the two oxygen atoms are present when if you take an analogy of a book. However, the similar thing we see for H2O2 in the gaseous state, or also when the H2O2 in the liquid state, same shape will be there, or even in the solid crystalline phase. So what we see that if you compare these two things at two extreme points, gas phase and the solid phase, what we see this angle. The angle means this OH and OH. This is the dihedral angle that we talk about. Means this is one plane, and the one plane, this one plane is made up of the plane in which these three atoms are there. OOH plane, and then this is another plane, OOH plane, this one. And the angle between these two planes in the gaseous phase structure is 111.5 degree. And this is also called the dihedral angle. Dihedral angle or the torsional angle between this OH and OH. This one can look at, if you put an eye on here, and you will see when this oxygen atom is, if you are not able to see this oxygen atom, so whatever the angle it means, these two, when we'll put exactly eye here so that these two oxygen atoms overlap, you can imagine this, then whatever the angle that you will presume is between these two OH groups, because there will be the two lines. Suppose these two oxygen atoms are same atom, so you have to just this vector, you just project this vector over here, and that angle is actually 115.5. And the other way is the dihedral or torsional angle is to look into these two planes, so HOO on OOH, and whatever the angle is between these two planes is also dihedral angle. So this angle in gas phase is 111.5. However, this angle in the solid phase is 90.2 degree only. And OO bond distance is 147.5 picometer in the gaseous state. However, in the solid state, we see this bond length, this bond is also becomes stronger, it shortens, becomes smaller. This is 145.8 picometer, and this bond is shortened. This OO bond, so what will have, consequently OH bond should be elongated, because this is how the chemistry goes. And so and that is why this, we can see the OH bond length in the gas phase 95.0 picometer, and this is 98.8 picometer. It means the orbital overlap, when overlap becomes stronger between O and O, some other overlap will be diminished, because this will happen because this orbital is somehow is getting larger, and if it is getting larger in some other direction, the orbital, this is orbital means what? Electron density, and that electron density will be reduced from some other area, and if that is reduced, what we see that bond length is actually there is less overlap of the actually orbitals, and less overlap will be there. Diminished overlap, it means the bond length will be elongated, or it will so that is what we see, 98.8 8 picometer. So these two, both of this means H2O2 is a non-planar structure and a non-planar structure, the analogy that we give of the open book. And the solid state, what we see, the dihedral angle is smaller. This value you may not remember, that's okay, but you should remember in the solid phase, this angle, the torsional angle, is smaller than the gaseous state. And also O bond length is smaller in the solid state than the O bond length in the gaseous state. And because of that, as a consequence of that, what will do, the OH bond length will be elongated into in the solid state. So anyway, now let us look into the chemical properties of H2O2. And the chemical property of H2O2, what we know, the H2O2 acts as an oxidizing as well as a reducing agent both, and it also acts as an oxidizing and a reducing agent in both alkaline and acidic medium. Alkaline medium is the basic medium, and acidic medium. And why it behaves as both oxidizing as well as a reducing agent, I have explained it earlier when I was teaching redox chemistry. And this is because oxygen, the oxidation state of oxygen in H2O2 is -1. However, from -1 oxidation state of oxidation number of oxygen can further be reduced. It can go to -2, or it can be increased. Oxidation number of oxygen can be 0, and sometimes, occasionally, that it may become positive when the fluorine is bound to it. Otherwise, oxygen is here -1 is it is between 0 and -2, and 0 means the oxidation number increased. From -1 to 0, it goes, oxidation number has increased. So it itself has oxidized, so it will reduce others. And if it goes from -1 to -2, means it has reduced, means H2O2 has reduced, so it will oxidize others. So this is how the H2O2 is actually, since its oxidation state is in the middle of the two extremes, that is why it behaves as both oxidizing as well as reducing agent. So oxidizing properties of H2O2, let us first look at the oxidizing properties. Means what? It will increase the oxidation number of other substances with whom it will react. So H2O2, when it reacts with Fe ferrous sulfate in acidic medium, H2SO4 is just providing the acidic medium with the presence of H plus ion, which is catalytic. So H2O2 actually reacts with the ferrous sulfate and it oxidizes ferrous sulfate. As because we are looking at the oxidizing properties, it means what will it do? It will increase oxidation state of iron, ferrous, and the ferrous sulfate iron is +2 oxidation state. So it will go to +3 oxidation state in ferric, and so it will be ferric sulfate. And sulfate, we know the sulfur oxidation number is highest. Here in sulfate, we have seen earlier, it's +6. So it cannot further oxidize sulfur here in this example. So it is the ferric sulfate that we get as a product, and that this is in acidic medium, so we'll also get some H plus ion that will be there. So this is only to show that this reaction is happening in acidic medium. Now H2SO3, when reacts with H2O2, what we know, H2SO3 is a weak acid. It's a weak acid, and when it reacts with H2O2, what will it will get oxidized. And oxidized means what? In H2SO3, oxidation number of sulfur is 4. 3 into 2 minus 2. So 6 minus 2 is +4. So oxidation number of sulfur is +4. However, it can go up to +6. So otherwise, sulfur will be oxidized here, and we get H2SO4. So H2SO4 oxidizes H2SO3 to form H2SO4. Now it also oxidizes PBS. This is plumbous sulfide, and this plumbous sulfide, it oxidizes it to form PbSO4 plus 4H2O. One should remember here that Pb, lead +2 oxidation state, is more stable than lead +4 oxidation state. Here in the case of iron, we know that for iron +3 oxidation state is more stable than iron +2 oxidation state. Region we will see the half filled orbital of the d orbital of the iron, because if in the Fe3 plus, it will have the oxidation state will have 3d5 the configuration, and 3d5 configuration, it is achieved a half filled orbital. And so because of that, what we see, this is Fe3 plus is more stable than Fe2 plus, because in Fe2 plus is 3d6, it is not half filled. Then in the case of lead, +2 is more stable, and the reason for that is the inert pair effect. If you remember, I have taught this in periodic properties. So inert pair effect. What is inert pair effect? Means as we go down in the group, particularly in p block elements, as we go down, what will happen? The penetration power of s orbital increases. And what is the penetration power? Means that the s orbital of whatever, because of this spherical symmetry, they like to be closer to the nucleus. This is what we call penetration power. These are all the theoretical concepts, and these water orbitals, everything that has come from the equations, the solution of the Schrodinger equation. So anyway, for the hydrogen atom, so that is not the experimental thing that we know, but orbitals, everything that we talk, the s orbital, the penetration power is more, so it is more closer to the nucleus, and if it becomes more closer to the nucleus, it is very difficult to remove electrons from the s orbital. So if you remember, lead is a carbon family element, so carbon, silicon, germanium, tin, and lead. So lead electronic configuration is what for the carbon family? The outermost configuration, it is NH2, NP2. So these H2 electrons, one can expect that they will be easily removable. One can expect all the 4 electrons will go to somewhere else to make this lead in +4 oxidation state, and this is, sorry, there is some mistake. It is, sorry, no, this is not here. So anyway, that we'll see somewhere else, that example. So in this case, what we see is the sulfur which is oxidized. I'm very sorry, I forgot to see this. I could not see this structure. So this is sulfide. PbS is H2 minus. H2 minus oxidation state of sulfur is it. Let me first explain that. So plus uh, this inert pair effect. So what we see, the two electrons on the s orbital, ns2 orbitals of lead are not easily removable, and that is we call the inert pair effect. The examples we'll see later on why and where it is applicable. Let us now look into this reaction. So PbS, the oxidation state of sulfur here is -2. This is, and here in the case of PbSO4, blade sulfate, it is oxidation state of sulfur is +6. That we know, the sulfate oxidation state of sulfur is +6. So what will happen? The oxidation of sulfur is happening here from -2 to +6, and it was done by H2O2. Now in this example, if you look at K4 FeCN6, this is called potassium ferrocyanide. Potassium ferrocyanide. When it reacts with H2O2 in acidic medium, what we get? We get potassium ferricyanide. This is potassium ferrocyanide. What is the ferrocyanide structure? This K4. This is a K4, so 4K plus is shown here. And now this is the ferrocyanide structure of the ferrocyanide. What is the structure of ferrocyanide? It is a coordination compound, and the iron, it is bound with 6 Cn minus groups, and its oxidation number is +2. It means we can assume +2 charge on iron. So +2 charge on iron, and Cn minus 1 Cn is Cn minus. So 4 negative charges there. What should be net charge? 6 Cn minus, and one iron is +2 oxidation state, +2 charge. So it will be 4 minus, and 4 minus charge is shown here on this complex. And this 4 charge is balanced by, to balance this charge, we need to have 4K plus ions, and that is why we saw K4 FeCN6. This is called potassium ferrocyanide. This structure you should remember, and now it forms potassium ferricyanide. Again, from ferro to ferri, and ferri we know oxidation state of iron is +3. So what we get? If we get +3 charge here, so we, and 6 Cn minus ions, so there will be net charge of 3 minus. So that will be balanced by 3K plus ions. So that is why its chemical formula is K3 FeCN6. And then H2O and K2SO4 is what we get. So what we get? Ferricyanide is oxidized into, sorry, ferrocyanide is oxidized into ferricyanide by H2O2. And not, why not by H2SO4? Why? Because we know hydrogen oxidation number is still there, +1. Sulfur is still there, the same. Oxygen, it is still same. What is the only thing that is oxidation number of only element that is changed is the iron. And that is why the oxidation of only iron we are talking about here. Now, if you look at the reaction of H2O2 with benzene. So when H2O2 reacts with benzene, it forms phenol. So this is one way one can prepare phenol from benzene. And what happens, this benzene that you know perhaps the structure, it's a very common compound, and OH you just replace that one hydrogen of the benzene with OH group, or maybe you introduce one oxygen between carbon and hydrogen atoms of the benzene, one of the only CH bonds, that is what we call the phenol plus H2. This is also the oxidation. Why? Because simply we are adding oxygen. If you remember the traditional definitions of oxidation, so simply you see oxygen is added to it. Another way, what will happen, to whatever carbon oxygen is added, its oxidation number has changed. It will become positive, because in the benzene, if you look at all the carbon has -1 charge, and if in the phenol, one of the carbon will have +1 charge, because of the OH group. Oxygen's electronegativity is more than carbon, and carbon's electronegativity is more than hydrogen. So of carbon, one of the carbon in benzene becomes from was -1, and it became +1 in phenol. So that is why it is the oxidation. NaNO2 plus H2O2, what we give, it forms NaNO3. It gives a nitrate, from nitrite to nitrate, and this is what H2O2 that we get as a side product. So NO2, the oxidation number of nitrogen in this NO2 is +3. This is what NO2 minus, it's -1, and -1 already there, this -4, and then it will become +1. The oxidation number of nitrogen is +3 here in this case. I hope you can find out it. So again, let me explain it. The oxidation number of sodium one can calculate +1, or maybe that +1, to balance that +1 charge, it will be nitrite NO2 minus. Anyway, let us look at the oxidation number of all the atoms involved here. +1 for sodium, and for nitrogen, I do not know, so let's say oxidation number is X. 1 plus X, and 2 into 1 oxygen is -2. So it will be 1 plus X minus 4, and net charge is 0, equals to 0. So X minus 3 is equal to 0. So X will be +3. So in NaNO2, the oxidation number of nitrogen is +3, and it becomes NaNO2, and becomes NaNO3, and the oxidation number, where the oxidation number of nitrogen is +5. So it has the oxidation number has increased. This is oxidation. Now the K2Cr2O7, it also oxidizes potassium dichromate. We call potassium dichromate in the acidic medium to form this chromium oxide, and this chromium oxide is this. So the oxidation number of chromium in this case is +6, because oxidation number of chromium cannot be more than 6, because chromium has only 6 electrons in its outermost shell, and this is CrO5, and it is how, if you look at simply the oxygen, all the oxygen, if you give -2 oxidation number as a oxide, you will not get the right oxidation number for chromium. So to do that, we have to understand the structure of chromium. How will we get, even if you don't know? So you have to understand the chromium's outermost shell electron, it is 6. So oxidation number of chromium cannot be more than 6. And to make that oxidation number 6, you can just play with how oxygen atoms can be bound together, and then with the chromium. And based on that, you can give the oxidation, assigned oxidation, or the structure of the chromium oxide as well. And this is why oxygen, when oxygen forms bond, the oxidation number of oxygen becomes -1 only. So this is peroxide. Actually, this is peroxide. This is also peroxide. And so these two oxygens will have -2 charge. This will have -2 charge, and this single oxygen, which is oxide, has -2 charge. So total -6 charge, and those -6 charge are balanced by the charge on the single chromium atom, which so chromium atom should have +6 charge. So chromium is oxidized here. Now, if you look at here again, then the basic medium reactions in the base, all these reactions were in the acidic medium, some reactions the basic medium we can also see, or the alkaline medium. So iron, it also becomes, ferrous also becomes ferric in alkaline solution, OH minus, in presence of H2O2, or the Mn plus, it becomes Mn4 plus, in alkaline medium in presence of H2O2. So this plus 2 to plus 6, plus 4, the reactions, real reactions are not shown. Some examples you can see, but simply, so symbolically, what you have to understand is what is the oxidation reduction and how H2O2 does this kind of things in acidic or basic medium. Now the reducing properties of H2O2 in the uh, alkaline and acidic solutions, let us see. And this the reducing property of H2O2. First, H2O2 when it reacts with ozone, it forms water plus oxygen. Now how it is reducing? Because first of all you should understand the ozone. So let us know, is ozone a compound? It's not a compound, because only oxygen atoms are involved in forming this O3 gas, O3 molecule. So this is a molecule, but it is not a compound. And why it is not? Because it is made up of only one type of atom, and only one type of atom means it is made up of only atoms of oxygen. Oxygen, that is an element, so one can consider it as an element and do it in a molecular form. So H2O2 oxidation number of oxygen in O3 is 0, and when it reacts with H2O2, what we get? We get water, and water oxidation number of water is what? It's -2. And so one can consider here, this is the water is oxygen is reduced from 0 to it became -2. So this is what? Reduction. And Ag2O2 plus H2O2, what we get from here? Ag plus 2 plus 1 oxidation state, and we get 2 Ag, 0. So plus 1 to 0, it becomes what? It is reduced. It is reduced. Oxidation number has gone down. It is decreased. It has reduced. So this is what the reduction. Reduction is oxidation number is reduction. The PbO2, it forms PbNO3 twice, and PbNO3 twice. Here we can look into the inert pair effect. In PbO2, what we know, the plumbum lead, this is the plumbic, and this lead is in +4 oxidation state, which is not stable. Now it gets converted into a more stable oxidation state, but this reaction +4 to +2 is not kinetically feasible. It was associated with very high barrier. So H2O2 has made this possible, and H2O2 actually converted +4 blade from +4 to +2, and this is more stable because of the inert pair effect, which I explained. And now the KMnO4, when it reacts with H2O2 in acidic medium, it forms MnSO4, and so KMnO4 manganese +7 oxidation state to +2 oxidation state. It happens, it goes in acidic medium, so +7 to +2 in acidic medium it happens for MnO4 manganese, and this is what with the compound or the substance which reduced it here in this case is H2O2. And H2O2, because so its oxidation state should also be increased, and one can see that there. And how it is increased? Because oxygen gas, you see on all the cases oxygen gas is formed wherever the reduction we are talking about, and that is means the H2O2 is oxidized and to form O2, because in H2O2 oxidation number of oxygen is -1, and in O2 gas it is 0, so it is oxidized, so it is reducing others. In the previous examples you will see the formation of water molecule everywhere, and this is what we see, the formation of water, and this is what, because the O2 formation of water in all the compounds, or here it is not. So here also the okay, here it is not required because oxygen is gone here, and that oxygen is anyway, and our water will is in -2 oxidation state. In the case of oxygen, it was H2O2, it was in -1 oxidation state, and in the case of phenol, the oxidation number of oxygen is -2, because one minus because of carbon, one minus because of the hydrogen. And other cases, all the other cases, we see the formation of water where the oxidation number of oxygen is -2, and that oxygen has come from the H2O2, and H2O2 oxidation state of oxygen is -1. So the oxidation state has reduced, so that is why it has oxidized others. So anyway, like we see here, this example, Cl2 plus H2O2, we get HCl, and Cl plus O2. Again, this is the reducing property. Reducing property, chlorine in zero oxidation is from zero oxidation state has gone to -1 oxidation state, which is reduction. And the H2O2 is also oxidized in this case, right? KAuCl4 and KAuCl4 we see, but with the formation of gold, pure gold, and from this compound and KCl. So what will happen? The oxidation number of AU in this case is Cl4 3, it is +3, and from +3 it has gone to 0. So this is a reduction of gold, and so the oxidation of the state of oxidation of H2O2 to O2 oxygen. HOCl plus H2O2, it gives H3O plus Cl minus O2. What we see in the chlorine here is in +1 oxidation state. Why? Because this chlorine is bound to oxygen atom, and oxygen's electronegativity is more than chlorine, so there is +1 charge on chlorine. And so oxidation state of chlorine in this HOCl, this compound is +1, and from there it has gone to chloride form, and chloride oxidation state is -1. So this is also a reduction, and the oxidation happened to this H2O2, and that is why we see the formation of oxygen gas. And iodine plus H2O2 in alkaline medium, these are the acidic medium reactions that we have seen. The alkaline medium we can also see. So I2 plus H2O2 2OH minus, it gives 2I minus. So what we see here, I2 iodine 0 to -1, so 0 reduction in oxidation number, so reduction. And of H2O2 we see the formation of O2, which is oxidation. Then again MnO4 plus 3H2O2, this you should remember, MnO4 in alkaline medium, manganese from +7, it goes to +4 oxidation state. It always forms MnO2. So KMnO4 forms in an alkaline medium, it forms MnO2. In acidic medium, it forms what we have seen here, it forms MnSO4 or Mn2 plus. So this here, what we see that this is also reduction. From here it is 7 to +2 in acidic medium, and basic medium we see from +7 to +4. Mn2 oxidation number of Mn is +4. And we see then again the oxidation of H2O2 to oxygen. Also what we see, like water H2O2 is also acidic, and acidic reactions of H2O2 we can see it reacts with base. How it is acidic with? So it will react with base, and it reacts with NaOH, and it forms Na2O2 plus water, and we know the acid base reaction water is formed. And what is here? It is just a replacement. This sodium has gone with this O2. So 2 sodium, to balance this reaction we need to have 2 NaOH. So 2 NaOH means 2 Na will go with 2 oxygen, so Na2O2 is formed. And anyway, why 2 Na plus is required? This is O2 2 minus, this peroxide. This is peroxide, and the 2 minus charge is there. To balance that charge we need 2 sodium ions, and now it goes to 2H2O. So this is acid base reaction. This one is, this is base, and reaction, the neutralization, water is forming here. H2O2 can also react with Na2CO3. We know this is also a base, and it forms again Na2O2. And again, this Na2 goes to oxygen, and this will form H2CO3, which is a carbonic acid. And a carbonic acid, which is not a stable acid, it decomposes into water and carbon dioxide. And this is what we know. So carbon dioxide reacts with water to form carbonic acid. That we know this reaction. This acid is not that much stable, and that we also know. Now let us look at the storage of H2O2. So H2O2 decomposes slowly on exposure to light, or even to in the heat conditions. So this is why we need H2O2. And this reaction happens, H2O2, the liquid form, it gives 2H2O plus oxygen, and this reaction we have seen earlier. So what we need to store it, we need to store it in the dark, because the presence of light, it decomposes very fast. When in absence of light, it decomposes because H2O2 is thermodynamically not stable. So this reaction is kinetically prohibited. Though it is kinetically prohibited, but over a time, which means it is very slow reaction. So over a time, by a longer period time, this molecule will definitely be decomposed, and oxygen gas and water molecules will be formed. So in the presence of this reaction is catalyzed by the presence of metal surface or metals, or the trace of alkali, which is a base. So what we know that while storing, we should not have whatever the container, it should not contain any metal, or it should not also contain any glass, because in the presence of those, this reaction, the decomposition reaction is catalyzed. So therefore H2O2 is stored in bottles lined with wax or plastic vessels in glass. And even if the bottle is, or but we have to, if the bottle is the glass bottle, so it should be wax should be there, or in the plastic vessel. And even the storing it in the glass is not very ideal thing. Why? Because you see, during the reaction, the decomposition reaction, oxygen gas is producing, and oxygen gas, while because of the production of oxygen gas, we know the volume of the solution, it increases if the gas is being produced. So after a certain time, what we see, that because of the formation of the gas, the pressure inside the bottle will be increasing. And since the glass bottles, they are not very strong, so, and there is no elasticity with them, so what will it will shatter after some time, so that will be very dangerous. So we should not, ideally we should not put it into the glass bottles, and even if it is put into the glass bottles for a smaller period of time, so it should be waxed from the in the inner surface should be waxed. Otherwise this decomposition will become faster, and this glass will be shattered, it will be broken. So urea can be added as a stabilizer. So to stabilize this H2O2, to not have this reaction very fast, we add urea, which is a stabilizer for H2O2. What is that? What is the reaction? It's one thing one can understand is urea, it forms a stable hydrogen bond with H2O2, and with a stable hydrogen bond, what it happens, the lone pairs that were actually repelling much to each other in H2O2, it reduces that thing slightly. There are some other things. Urea also, it protects H2O2 to get exposed to the other catalysts. So this way urea is also working as a stabilizer. So it is kept away. So H2O2 is kept away from the dust, because why? Because dust also contains sometimes metal particles and some other chemicals, and which may induce the decomposition of H2O2, because metals will induce decomposition, and we know the dust particles contains the metal particles, small particles of metals as well. And that is what we, when we detect the air, composition of air and all these things, we get certain metal particles are there. So in the dust, and when the metal, when this decomposition happens very fast, so it is called the explosive decomposition of H2O2 may happen. The catalytic decomposition of H2O2 is very explosive, it is very fast. And so the rough glass surfaces also causes the decomposition of hydrogen peroxide. So rough glass surface, that is why it is coated with the bags from inside. 35% hydrogen peroxide is used worldwide in municipal water supplies instead of chlorine, to disinfect and stop the growth of unwanted organism, because it's so H2O2 acts as disinfectant. With one of the use of H2O2 is this. So handling of H2O2, H2O2 is stored in a cool, dry place away from the sunlight and other sources of heat, because heat also can decompose, can hasten the decomposition of this reaction. So this is what we see. So by handling, it may increase the decomposition rate of decomposition. So we should be kept away from the heat sources as well. So always use non-metallic utensils. Why non-metallic? Because metals catalyzes the decomposition of H2O2. So do not allow contact with easily burnable materials such as paper and other things, because paper and other things also, they are made up of cellulose and they can be oxidized very easily. So they are burnable material, and we know the burning is also oxidation. So this is what may happen. So you should keep away H2O2 away from the concentrated H2O2. It is very dilute H2O2, that is not dangerous much. So always store hydrogen peroxide in containers supplied, whatever container it is supplied. So you should keep that H2O2 in that container only. Replace cap immediately after use. Once you open the cap to use to take H2O2, so once, if you are in the laboratory, so whatever the vessel it is provided to you, after taking H2O2, you should keep the cap closed immediately, because if the cap is open, it is now more exposed to the environment and also the some gases. So it is important that nothing gets into the container, as this may lead to the hydrogen peroxide breaking down, which could result in explosions, because air contains many particles, many things, and with that mixture, it, when the surface it can react, and the decomposition will become faster. So whatever the concentration of H2O2 that you consider for your calculations in your experiments, you think that this is the what the H2O2 is there, and this is what the strength of H2O2 is. And when you do calculation, it will be something else wrong, some different result. This is because H2O2 that was provided initially to you, that the same strength is not there, because H2O2 has also decomposed into water and oxygen. So whenever you use H2O2, before using H2O2, we always do certain kind of reactions to find out the actual strength of that H2O2 solution to have these calculations correct. Otherwise, if you use the previous data, normality or other things, you may get wrong results because that has changed because of the decomposition of H2O2. So always wear suitable protective gloves while using concentrated H2O2. Avoid contact with eyes and face, because we know it oxidizes and decomposes, oxidizes and reduces many things. So eye and everything, our body is what it is, also organic molecules there at the surfaces. So they will also be harmed by H2O2, particularly if it is in high concentration. If it is in low concentration, that is not of much worry. And for eye, so it should, even in the dilute concentration, it should not go to the eyes. If it goes to eye, so you have to immediately rinse it from water, pure water only. So do not use on damaged or sensitive skin. So however, the very dilute solution of H2O2 is used in cleaning wounds, and particularly that we get that water that from the dressings, while doing dressings of wounds, that we use H2O2 to disinfect that area. So if it is very diluted, that is not an issue, but if it is concentrated, so it will damage the skin. So wash any residue down the drain with plenty of water. Do not burn it. Do not try to burn H2O2. These are the handling. And if you somehow it is very concentrated, maybe 85% or 30%, more than 30% H2O2 is gone into somewhere, particularly in eyes, what will you do? So if hydrogen peroxide gets into eyes or on the skin, concentrated, rinse immediately with plenty of water. If symptoms persist or if it is swallowed, if you have swallowed it somehow, seek medical attention immediately. Always use water or to dilute and mop up spillage. So if the spillages are there on the surfaces, so what will you do? You add water to dilute it and then clean it. The decomposition reaction of H2O2 I have already explained. So H2O2 has weaker O bond, and this is weaker O bond because of the presence of lone pairs on oxygen, which is susceptible. These O bonds are susceptible for light or heat, so they'll easily break. So if the sunlight is used, what will happen? This H2O2, which is OH bond, so these two bonds will be homolytically cleaved. And homolytically means what? So the bond shared pair of electrons, that two electrons that were there in the sharing between two oxygen atoms, those both the electrons were provided by two different oxygen atoms. So now these oxygen atoms will take their electrons and will be parted away. They will be separated. This is what we call the homolytic cleavage. Means equal cleaving of equal distribution of the shared pair of electrons is called homolytic cleavage. If that equal sharing is not there, then we call the heterolytic cleavage. And heterolytic cleavage, if you remember the structure of HCl, you put HCl in water and you see it becomes H plus and Cl minus. This is a heterolytic cleavage, because in HCl molecules there are two electrons that were shared, that were in the sharing, and both the electrons were one of those electrons have come from hydrogen and one came from the chlorine. However, when these two species parted away in aqueous solution, both the chlorine takes both the electrons. It is more powerful. It takes both the electrons, and hydrogen has no electron. Therefore, it is H plus, which is a proton. So that is a heterolytic cleavage. So homolytic cleavage, if wherever it is peroxide or sunlight is used, usually, or the very high heat, usually we look at the homolytic cleavage. And the application of such reactions we'll see more profoundly in organic chemistry. So because the free radicals are formed, this is called HO free radicals. And this free radical, the initiation of reactions happen, and then the propagation and rest of the things we see later on. So in the presence of peroxide, what we see, this is the initiation of the formation of the first radical is called the initiation step, and this is the initiation step. And if there is some other element, it may react with other compounds like hydrocarbons or something. If it is not there, so what we see, this radical, HO radical, will now react with another H2O molecule, and See, then the water molecules will be formed and this HOO radical will be formed. Because HO radical now what will it do? It will take hydrogen with its electron. So hydrogen, this one abstract hydrogen with its electrons. So hydrogen now becomes water, and the oxygen that was bound to hydrogen is left with its own electrons. So that is what we get this odd pair of electron on oxygen here. Now this HOH, it can react with H2O2, it will form HO radical plus water plus oxygen. Now again this HO radical will go then do this reaction. So this is what we call the propagation step. And later on, if you want to do this reaction, deliberately, so you can also stop it. So to stop it, you have to quench these radicals. And in this case, we don't desire, but this happens automatically. So this out will go till all the H2O2 is decomposed to water and oxygen. And but in the certain reactions, when we look into the alkanes, reactions of alkanes and chlorine, gens of chlorine or something, that we will see the free radicals reactions, because we later on quench, we add certain chemicals to stop those reactions. That we do by quenching the free radicals that were formed. And now the usage of peroxide, we can see the H2O2 is as one of the use we have seen. It is used as a disinfectant and the water supply. Sometimes many places in the world they do it. So H2O2 is most commonly used as hair bleach and as a mild disinfectant. Spray it on surface like kitchen counter top and wipe with a clean rag. You may even use it to disinfect your cutting board where you chop the vegetables, the chopping board. The diluted hydrogen peroxide can be used as a mouthwash. This mouthwash is also said to whiten teeth. Ensure that you do not swallow the liquid while rinsing. So this is what, once you swallow H2O2, then you will have to do. You will have to see the doctor. So you try to avoid H2O2 for the mouth for cleaning or the mouth, or the use as a mouthwash. Some farmers use hydrogen peroxide as an insecticide. They spray diluted H2O2 on plants to kill the pests and weeds, because the pests and weeds they are not so pests that we know they will be harmed with H2O2, and but one cannot use H2O2 on any kind of plants or for any weeds, because weeds are also plants. So if you want to just kill the weeds only, then what will happen? Or sometimes the plant that you are trying to save may also be harmed by the use of H2O2. So for that, you need to have certain studies before that, and those information whether what kind of plants for the disinfecting, what kind of plants we can use H2O2. So that information you should have priorly before using it as pesticide or insecticide. So H2O2 is used to manufacture chemicals like sodium perborate. This is a sodium perborate. This is a O bond, peroxide bond, and you see there the boron, this OH, so sodium perborate or percarbonate, which are used in high quality detergents. And it is hydrogen peroxide is used in synthesis of hydroquinone. Hydroquinone is what the benzene ring. If you just replace two opposite CH bonds with CO bonds, C double bond O bonds, and then you have to arrange the double bond in the benzene ring itself. So there will be only two double bonds with the inside the benzene ring, and two double bonds associated with two terminal C double bond O. The structure is called hydroquinone. The tartaric acid is a very important thing. Tartarate and other things you will see in organic chemistry. I hope hydroquinone will also see later on the structures. These two compounds you remember, and certain food products and pharmaceuticals like cephalosporin we also use in synthesis of these compounds. So H2O2 is used in synthesis of these compounds, and we have also seen synthesis of phenol from the benzene using H2O2 in the organic, that we may see in the organic chemistry. It is employed, H2O2 is, or the hydrogen peroxide is employed in the industries as a bleaching agent for textiles, paper pulps, leather, oils, fats, etc. Nowadays, it is also used in environmental or green chemistry. For example, in pollution control treatment of domestic and industrial effluents, we use H2O2 because it is a disinfectant. It's oxidation of cyanides. The cyanides, we know cyanides are very dangerous chemicals. They are lethal when very small concentration. So one can oxidize that cyanide, and so something, whatever the oxidation product will be, that is not dangerous for us. Restoration of aerobic conditions to sewage waste, etc. Now, another thing that we see for the use of H2O2 in the light sticks. And light sticks, what we light stick is a plastic tube with a glass vial inside of it. If you know, you have seen this light sticks. If you have not seen, that's okay. But if you have seen, you just bend it. What will happen? Then it will some light. You will see some lightning, some glow inside. You will see. And why it happens? Because this is the structure, initial structure of this light stick. So inside it is the glass vial is kept, and in that glass vial hydrogen peroxide solution we keep. And outside that we add phenyl oxalate ester or any other fluorescent dye which can absorb light and show the color later on. So what will happen? So once you bend it, so this vials breaks, and this vials breaks, so H2O2 now it comes out and it mixes with phenyl oxalate. And phenyl oxalate, what will happen? It will react with the phenyl oxalate, and a light will be produced, and that light will be absorbed by the fluorescent dye solutions, and then it will glow when this they will return to the ground state. What is the fluorescence? Other things perhaps not in your syllabus. The fluorescence, you just understand the certain this is the chemiluminescence. Some of the chemicals they absorb light and to go into the excited state. When they come back from certain state, that is what we call the fluorescence. And there is a phosphorescence, similar thing, but we see the glow in that. So in order to activate a light stick, you bend the plastic stick which breaks the glass vial. This allows the chemicals that were inside the glass to mix with the chemicals in the plastic tube. Once these substances contact each other, a reaction starts taking place, and the reaction releases light, causing the sticks to glow. Now, this is chapter the dihydrogen we have looked at. This is the final slide or the penultimate slide. So here this chapter will be over. So dihydrogen, we nowadays people are looking it as a source of the as a fuel source and a source of the energy. And if you look at the energy per mole of the different substances that we use, dihydrogen in the gaseous state, dihydrogen in the liquid, and dihydrogen in LPG or something, the methane. What we see, if you look at the per gram combustion, what we see, the dihydrogen, it gives energy. 1 gram per gram energy, the produced energy for dihydrogen is maximum in this case, you see. So if you use same mass of different fuels, same amount of different fuels, you will see maximum amount of energy with the dihydrogen if you burn dihydrogen. However, this is what we see here, 143 kilocalorie per mole. And this and other cases for the if the dihydrogen in liquid state, this is also dihydrogen, the LPG, CH4, and the octane in liquid is a kind of petrol, the part of gasoline is 47. So we can see here almost 3 times energy that we obtain from dihydrogen as compared to the gasoline or the petrol. So it can releases approximately 3 times more energy than petrol or mass. Or mass basis means 1 gram fuels exactly same mass of different fuels, particularly petrol and dihydrogen. You will get 3 times more energy using dihydrogen than fuel. And if the dihydrogen is there, if it reacts with oxygen, it will form water, which is not a pollutant. The carbon dioxide is something the pollutant that we consider. Water is already there in atmosphere because of evaporation and all things happens. So whatever the concentration, any concentration of water may not be a pollution. If it goes into excess, the precipitation will happen, the rain will happen, and so it will come down on the earth. So water is not pollutant, so it is very desirable to use hydrogen as a fuel, because if we can do that, we will solve the many problems. We will get more energy per gram, then we'll also have solved the problem of the pollution. However, and the pollutants in dihydrogen, however, whatever the dihydrogen, if you want to keep the pure keeping and extracting or forming pure dihydrogen is very difficult. It comes with certain pollutants, and that pollutants, but those pollutants in dihydrogen when combusted are less than the pollutants in the petrol. So anyway, And the only pollutants will be the oxides of dinitrogen due to the presence of dinitrogen as impurity with the dihydrogen, because hydrogen you are taking from the atmosphere somewhere, so dinitrogen will also be there. So with that, if the nitrogen is there, oxidation of hydrogen is happening, so oxidation of nitrogen will also be happening, so NOx gas will be formed. But it is not the COX or SOX gases, it is NOx gases that we make it at maximum. And but that dinitrogen, their presence we can also reduce, and what will we do? So that can be minimized by injecting a small amount of water into the cylinder to lower the temperature to prevent the reaction between dinitrogen and oxygen. So oxygen reaction between dinitrogen and dioxygen happens at higher temperatures. So if you are burning hydrogen, the temperature rises, and at that temperature dinitrogen can also react with dioxygen to form NOx gases. And those are pollutants. But that reaction we can somehow, you can reduce the percentage or the happening of those reactions to certain extent if you add water or some other cooling agents. And so the only thing, mostly the thing that will be the released in the atmosphere will be the water vapor, and this is not a pollutant. But the limitations of this technology, whatever we desire, that is very good if we get that, but there is certain limitations with that. And a cylinder compressed of a dihydrogen, okay, cylinder of compressed dihydrogen, because hydrogen is gas, a very small amount will be there in any vessel to keep at the normal pressure. So we have to put dihydrogen at a very high pressure and to compress that dihydrogen to keep it in a cylinder. That cylinder would weigh about 30 times as much as a tank of petrol containing the same amount of energy. So that energy, that tanker you have to carry, so you have to carry 30 times more than you have to provide energy or something it will be used. That tanker will be very heavy and a very small, whereas a very strong, the more and more materials will be involved to make that tanker. So dihydrogen gas is converted into liquid state by cooling to 20 Kelvin. This is one other thing. So you have to cool it to store it in an effective way. So 20 Kelvin, which is a very low temperature, it's minus 253 degree temperature. So minus 253 degree temperature, you can assume how lower it is. So which requires expensive insulated tanks as well. So to store these things, we also need to have expensive insulated tanks. So if we once keep this dihydrogen, even to keep put this dihydrogen into the liquid state to convert it, we need to have provide certain energy to cool it down. And once, even if it is cooled down, we have to keep it in some insulator which are very expensive. And those insulated wipes that there, so that if you have kept it at 20 Kelvin, so that temperature it should not absorb energy from the atmosphere or from the surrounding and to heat it, because once it absorbs heat or energy, and therefore these tankers they will explode because the pressure inside will be increased, so they'll explode. So tanks of metal alloys like sodium nickelates Ni5, Ti and TiH2 and MgH2, this kind of metal alloys that we form, it etc. are used for storing dihydrogen in small quantities, and even with that we can store it in a very small quantity, because if the more oxygen will be there, more oxygens will be in the, once they will absorb it, will go to the gaseous state and very high pressure will be there. So storing that will be very difficult. So the storage is the difficulty that is associated with the use of dihydrogen as a effective fuel. So these limitations prompted researchers to look for alternative techniques to use dihydrogen in an effective way. So people have looked into dihydrogen to get, so like sodium borohydride, it also contains hydrogen in larger amount. Sodium lithium hydride also contains hydrogen, so one can get from dihydrogen, converts it into some other alternative chemicals where they can have be in the solid or liquid state, like so ammonia borane NH3BH3 is another chemical which is in the solid state. So one can use hydrogen to form ammonia borane NH3BH3, and that because we know NH3BH3 3 moles of hydrogen is there, means 6 hydrogen atoms means the 3 moles hydrogen gas, hydrogen molecules. So if one can get those molecules back, but then again people found they try to get catalyst, design catalyst or synthesize catalyst, those were not very effective. So now storing hydrogen, now people are looking at something else. So still the hydrogen economy, though we can do technically or theoretically we can obtain very high amount of energy from the hydrogen, but that is not economical, that is not feasible currently, and means in the competitive market currently, because gasoline people are using, it is quite cheaper when with that, because the storing issue is not there with the petroleum. So that is why we need to have certain things which is economical, means we have to spend less money to store or to get energy from that. So it's a basic. So what we are looking at the hydrogen economy. So this basic principle of hydrogen economy is the transportation and the storage of energy in the form of liquid or gaseous dihydrogen, or liquid or gaseous state one can do it. And for that, what can we do? One example is the using, you can mix dihydrogen with the CNG or something. In 2005, the India has started it to put maximum 5% hydrogen in the gasoline, and this way one can increase the efficiency of the fuel as well, and also the CNG there, it's not much, percentage is not that much. And now people are also looking to increase this percentage, dihydrogen percentage into the CNG. It is also useful, the hydrogen is useful in fuel cell for generation of electric power. So now people are looking at to use hydrogen in the hydrogen fuel cell, and a fuel cell to that fuel cell vehicles that we look at. The fuel cell vehicles run on hydrogen instead of gasoline, so we have to provide hydrogen as a fuel and not as a gasoline that we usually use in the different vehicles that we use now, mostly the diesel or petrol vehicle that we use. So they are more, this fuel cell vehicles, they are more efficient than vehicles with internal combustion engines, means the engines that are based on the gasoline, and are non-polluting. They are non-polluting because the hydrogen is used, it will not pollute, and the reduced greenhouse gas emission, and the greenhouse carbon dioxide will not be, it will not be during this reaction. So the release of that greenhouse gas will also be not there into the, or the emission of that gas will not be there in the atmosphere. However, fuel cell vehicles are not yet economically viable. Again, the issue is economically it is not viable, but it cannot compete with the petrol and other alternative. It will, if we can develop a process to economically decompose water. So water is one thing which is in liquid state. So if you get certain technology to break water, and the water it contains hydrogen, so that we can use that hydrogen in situ. So we just decompose water and immediately we can use that hydrogen or produce hydrogen in another environmentally sound way. Fuel cell vehicles may be the way of the future. And what is the fuel cell vehicle? I'm sorry. So what we use, so maybe the hydrogen, it goes from one source. So hydrogen here, hydrogen decomposed into H plus ions and electrons, and these electrons will move through the circuit here, and so the electricity will be produced, and that electricity here, this is something that we can use for our purpose, whatever the purpose you want to use. And the H plus, that is the, which is shown here as a plus charge, which is H plus, it will move through this solution, this thing, the membrane that we use, and it will go to the other side. Here now the electrons will come back, and H plus is there, they will combine to form hydrogen back. And hydrogen, if the oxygen is there, so it will form water. And so this is how we get, or, and this is what the proton exchange membrane. So this is what the membrane that we call the proton exchange happens from here. So we also have to, we have to use certain materials, we can exchange proton very efficiently from this place to this place. So the research is also required here, and also breaking this hydrogen into H plus and electrons is not that easy. We need to use catalyst here again, and to also we also need to use catalyst at this place. There are a lot many things and lot many research required to do this, to make this thing efficient for the general use, and people are still working, researchers are working in this area, and I hope it will maybe some time, so maybe in the 10 or 20 years down the time, we'll have certain technology which is efficient and we can use for the purposes that we are hoping for.